Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education, and I'm your host, Andrew McCormick. So welcome to part 2 of looking at curriculum development and approaches to curriculum. You know, if you missed part 1 last week, definitely go check it out as I talked with the always intelligent and inspiring Johanna Russell. And we talked all things elementary curriculum development. Now we're going to bring on my longtime podcasting buddy, Tim Bogatz, to talk about the what and the how of curriculum development at the secondary level and how we as secondary teachers, you know, we might have slightly different concerns than elementary teachers have when it comes to curriculum development. But maybe not, you know. I have a hunch that Tim also kind of falls into the camp of not wanting to be told exactly what to do. That, you know, despite the fact that I sometimes joke that Tim is a glitter-hating, no-fun Nick, I think that his overall approach will be one of flexibility and openness. This entire episode is focused on approaches to curriculum development and design. And you know, this really gets me thinking about coverage, which I kind of find is kind of a horrible word to think of, but then also in a more positive way, variety, depth versus breadth, you know, making choices about what we focus on with our students. You know, are we leaving enough space for new projects to come to life as we respond to new ideas and new materials that are out there? Are we allowing for student choice as we develop our curriculum? You know, I think one of the great ways to think about allowing for this space and flexibility is by checking out one of AOE's classes, and in particular, designing your art curriculum. Their curriculum class is a really great hands-on class that, like all AOE classes, will get you to learn alongside other great inquisitive art teachers as you design tools to implement a curriculum that best fits your needs as a teacher. So head on over to theartofed.com and check out this course and all the other great classes under the courses tab. You know, it's been a surprisingly long time since Tim and I have had a chance to talk on the podcast, and I got a feeling that this one might run a little bit long. So I think we should just get right into it with Tim and see what sort of great insights he has into secondary curriculum development. All right, Tim, so thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's been a little bit. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, we haven't talked in a couple weeks. So, you know, last week I actually brought on Johanna, and we kind of talked about kind of her thoughts and her approach to curriculum, both in regards to development and execution. So I kind of want to start off by asking you, do you kind of have an overall approach to curriculum development?
Well, first of all, let me just say probably the best approach is to listen to whatever Johanna said and just follow that, because I feel like she knows way more than I do about this. But I would say for me personally, I think it really depends on the class that I'm teaching. You know, so if I'm doing an Art 1, or, you know, if you're in middle school doing like an introduction or an exploratory course or something like that, you know, I think it's all about just introducing kids to everything that art has to offer. So, you know, if we're doing Art 1, then, you know, we are materials wise, you know, we're doing drawing, painting, printmaking, sculpture, ceramics, just a little bit of everything, you know, whatever you can fit in, whatever you can introduce to your kids and just show them what's out there. Okay. And then as you move into more advanced classes, you know, like kids sign up for an advanced drawing class, you know, that shows me that they really want to learn how to draw. And so that's when, you know, we try and start to develop those skills a little bit more and get into a lot of the finer points and, you know, be able to go a little bit more in depth with whatever area of study. But I think, you know, more than anything, you just want to make sure that you're giving your kids challenges to help them be creative, to help them solve problems, you know, to use those higher order thinking skills. And I think for me, that's kind of what, you know, overrides my curriculum more than anything. You know, no matter what kind of studio projects I'm doing, you know, that's where my focus is, on the creativity and problem solving aspect of it.
So it kind of sounds like we're similar in a lot of ways in that we kind of start with the big picture and don't kind of get too bogged down with like specifics. I want to do this project, I want to do that project, but it's kind of big picture. And then we kind of work backwards and say, okay, what sort of things do I want to do to get to that end result, right?
Yeah, and that's totally how I think of it. And, you and I have talked a lot before about how we change lessons, how we are always trying new things. And so I think that necessitates us kind of working backwards like that because, you have your big goals, you have your overarching goals, and there's a million different ways to get there. Like you and I may be trying to get our kids to learn the same thing, but we're going to go about it in totally different ways. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to figure out first, what do you want your kids to learn? And then when you have that idea, when you have that direction as far as what you want them to learn, then you can figure out how to get there.
That's interesting. I've got a couple different things I want to kind of ask you about, but a lot of us have kind of started a new semester not that long ago. And I got to ask you, because I've done it both different ways. And I feel like there's kind of two main ways. When you start off a new semester or a brand new year, do you kind of have it all scripted out? Like, okay, here's the 9, 10, 8 projects I want to do. Or do you maybe have a sense of like 1 or 2 and then trust that the chips are going to kind of fall where they fall?
Oh, I don't know if I could just like go into a semester saying, well, I want to do this project and then we'll see what happens. Like that's not going to cut it for me. So generally what I would do is go through and list all of the projects that I wanted to teach. And maybe there's 15 projects, but we only have time for 6 of them or 10 of them. And so at that point, you need to maybe cut a little bit. But I think more than anything, you need to be flexible with what you're going to do, because maybe you have this idea of what you want to accomplish, but then you notice that your kids maybe aren't interested in that. Maybe they aren't, as capable as you thought they were. So maybe those challenges need to go in a different direction, or maybe you need to do something different to kind of play to their interests. And so I think it's good to have a huge variety of projects that you can draw from, but not necessarily be set in, I need to do A, B, and C. So I think just kind of drawing from a bigger pool and, keeping yourself flexible so that you are able to fit the needs of your students.
I made it sound like I'm just a fly by the seat of my pants, totally kind of guy.
Well, be honest.
Well, I'm a little more than you are, but I would say every semester I probably script out or think of like, okay, here's the 9 to, I've done as many as like, okay, here's 20 different projects, knowing full well I'll at best get through half of them. But I've definitely got like, 10 to 20 projects on, kind of on a list. And I've even kind of got a sequential order where it makes sense to me. Like first we'll do this one and then this would happen. I've never once in 12 years, like stuck to that list 100%. Like
right.
I might do some of them. I might come up with all brand new ones because something comes up or a student says we should do this. And it's like, oh, it's a great idea. So I think, just to echo what you're saying is to be flexible is like really, really important.
Okay. So can I ask you this? Like, you just kind of touched on this, but do you ever ask your students, just straight up ask them, what do you guys want to do next? Because, like with elementary, you can't do that quite as much, but with high school, I have no problem saying, hey, what are you guys interested in? Or saying, hey, I have 3 new ideas for a project. There's this, this, and this, which one would you like to do? Or I'll lay out all 3 of them and let them pick which one of the 3 might interest them. Like, do you ever go that direction with it?
Yeah, totally. Like I do, it seems like especially in like the last month of the semester or of the school year, I do a lot of like, hey guys, here's the final 3 projects I wanted to do. Realistically, we can only get through 2 of them. I'll introduce all 3 and you can take your pick. I do a lot of that. I call it, like the 2 for 3 special or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, just this last semester, I went to my drawing class and I just said, what should we do next? Because there was a girl who had kind of brought up that she wanted to do a certain project and we did it and I wasn't going to do it before she had kind of brought it up, and it was actually really successful. And I kind of went back to the well and said, okay, well, now what are you guys into? To be honest, I think I probably went to the well one too many times, and they came up with about another 2 or 3 projects. Some of them were good, some of them weren't good. And when I say that, I will listen to what they say. I'll take some input, but then I also tweak it and modify it and structure it and kind of build it from their initial idea. And I think it's helpful. I've had, I guess, two different reactions to that. Every once in a while, you'll have a student that'll look at you and say, hey, you're not very prepared. You're relying on us to come up with all these ideas.
That was going to be my next question right there.
Yeah, and that doesn't happen all the time. But when that does happen, I will just say, listen, I had a list of, 10 to 12 projects I wanted to do. But in order to help you guys be more motivated and engaged and interested, I'm kind of getting some feedback from you guys. And usually they kind of get it. I think it's just so new to them to have a teacher kind of turn over some of the power of the curriculum and say, what do we want to do next as a class, that they're just so baffled by it. They don't have any framework for it.
Yeah, it can put you in kind of a difficult spot. But, again, I think that, I don't know, it kind of goes back to the problem solving thing, honestly, where kids are faced with this new situation and they have to learn how to deal with it too. And, I'm assuming that there's some listeners out there just sort of like fuming at us right now. Like, how can you be so unprepared? That's such a cop out, things like that. But I think it really is a good, option for kids for a lot of reasons. Like you said, it gives them a sense of empowerment. It plays to their interests. And like I said, it teaches them like how to deal with a new situation. So I'm personally all for it.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, so this last semester, I probably had 3 projects that were student kind of created, or they took the initiative in making. They were pretty similar to some things I was going to do anyway. It's not like they were saying like, just some outlandish, stupid, pointless thing. I mean, there was a lot of good stuff in there that I was going to hit on anyway, so I was fine giving them some agency and giving them some control. But I kind of want to circle back. One of the things we're talking about really is like flexibility. And that's really one of the things that I love about being an art teacher, is being able to be creative with my curriculum and what I teach and how I teach.
Yes.
I mean, have you ever, and I think most teachers, that's what we like, but have you ever met teachers that are just like, I would love to be told what to teach and how to teach, because I actually think that would in some ways be easier, to be told that, here's your curriculum, here's how to do it. But I just don't know if that's great. But then I'm debating with myself, does that guarantee that the curriculum is like, PLC buzzwords guaranteed and viable if it's like passed down from on high and you have to do it this way? I mean, have you had any experience with sort of a you must teach this sort of environment?
I personally have not, and I'm thankful for that, because, although a curriculum like that can ensure quality and it can ensure consistency, and there's a place for that, I personally would just go crazy with that. And I feel like art teachers in general are very creative people, and we need to, just because of our personality, need to have that flexibility to be able to change things up, to be able to do what we want to do. And, I look at it this way. A lot of my teaching friends, like let's say in English, for example, every single day is laid out for them. Like on Tuesdays, you're going to do these vocabulary words. On Wednesday, you're reading from here to here and then having a discussion where you ask these questions. And it really takes all of the autonomy out of teaching, and it really kind of sucks the personality out of, what otherwise could be a really good teacher. And so while I see the benefit of, like I said, that consistency and that quality, I really think it's not as good as we can do as professionals. I feel like we have the knowledge, we have the creativity to put together things that not only play to our own strengths in teaching, but play to our students' strengths as well. And so I think we need to stay flexible as much as we can in order to incorporate those strengths into our curriculum.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But, just to play devil's advocate here, I think there's a lot of people out there who kind of exist and teach in a PLC, a professional learning community. And oddly enough, I think I'm kind of circling back to some of the language and the ethos of those, the guaranteed and viable curriculum. How do we know what we want students to learn? How will we know when they've learned it? So if we have all these art teachers that are kind of developing their own curriculum, how do we make sure then that there aren't, holes in the curriculum and oversights, or that there's not duplication? I mean, how do we ensure that we're not doing that as a district, as a vertical, like, secondary K-12 even? How do we ensure that?
Well, I don't know. For me, I think the best way to stay consistent, but still sort of honor that flexibility and that personality that we need to shine through, is bringing it back to the National Core Arts Standards, where no matter what you're teaching or no matter how you're teaching it, bring it back to that, create, produce, respond, connect. And, no matter what, if every teacher is, connecting back to those standards and letting that, drive their curriculum, then no matter, like I said, what they're teaching or how they're teaching, it can come back to that point. And I think that's a really good way to ensure consistency, ensure quality, but still, give us that autonomy as professionals that I think we need to be successful.
Yeah, and one of the things I've been to a number of the PLC conferences, that the people put on, and I've often told people I drank the Kool-Aid a long time ago about PLC, so I'm not getting paid by them or anything at Solution Tree, one of the big companies that puts it on, but they do talk about loose and tight. That there's certain things that as an art team, as an art district, you should be loose with, and some things you should be tight with. And I kind of think, Johanna mentioned a big C curriculum and a little C curriculum. One of the ways I think art teachers that we could have our cake and eat it too is how we teach and exactly what lesson plan we teach. That could be loose, but then what could come back and we say is tight. We all have this expectation that everything we teach does come back to this bigger C curriculum, National Core Arts Standards. I really do think that that's kind of a way that we can have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree completely. And I've heard Johanna talk about that before, and I really like the idea of the big C, little c. And if you need to align K-12, or if you need to work with other teachers in your district, there's nothing wrong with saying, here are these concepts. I would love you to cover them. You do it how you can do it best, and again, just letting teachers play to their strengths, but I think where we run into problems is when we say you need to cover these elements on these days and you need to go over these principles during this part of the semester. And it sucks the life out of the classroom because there's nothing to get excited about at that point.
Well, even worse, that's pretty bad, and that's pretty extreme when someone's saying, on Tuesday, you will cover this. But I think more realistically is we are going to cover this topic, and the way you are going to do it is by doing this product, this, this lesson plan. It's oh boy. Now, I do think there's some ways that we could, as art teachers, kind of take more ownership of that. There's ideas of lesson planning, kind of together. So maybe as a PLC, you write a lesson plan or even a curriculum together. But, I'm kind of playing this up like it's really, really hard to do. I think it just comes back to communication, right? Yeah. I'm a middle school teacher. You're a secondary teacher. And one of the things I think about as a middle school teacher, I know this sounds very business world, but I intake students and then I also output students. I kind of sound like a computer, but I get students from the elementary and there's kind of an expectation that they have some base level knowledge from their elementary art education, but then I also pass them along. And I think, making sure that you're getting kids as prepared as you want, but then also passing them along. It's just a matter of communication and communicating with all your other art teachers in the district.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, just going back to that point where it's not about the the product that you make. Like, you don't want to say, oh, well, they learn value scales in 7th grade, so I need to move on to, more holistic shading as we move into 8th and 9th grade. Like, it's about creativity. It's about problem solving. And like, you've written entire articles on how, kids are not going to be artists when they grow up. So we need to start thinking about design thinking, problem solving, creativity. And I think that's far more important than, deciding when we're teaching the color wheel or how we're going to deal with Impressionism.
I'm glad you made fun of Impressionism. That's my favorite one to kind of poke fun of. So, hey, I want to get you out of here on this, like a complete, like 360, 720, like really circle around. We've been talking about being flexible, keeping it fresh, innovative, asking your students for help. All that being said, do you think that there are just some cornerstone pieces of curriculum at the secondary level that we have to be teaching, or we're kind of like a dereliction of duty?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's different for every teacher, to be honest. Like, there are things that I teach well and therefore my kids do well. There are things that my colleagues have taught well and therefore they can pass it on to their kids. But again, I think the cornerstones are, either the core arts standards or going back, like I said, to even broader, just creativity, problem solving, creative thinking and all those sorts of things. So I don't know. For me, curriculum is not about, hitting these benchmarks with this type of media. It's about a much bigger picture. And so, again, I don't know that it necessarily matters how we're teaching there, how we're getting to that point. But I think we do need to kind of direct our students toward, those higher level of thinking and, those skills that are going to translate outside of the art room too.
Yeah, and I think, I just keep kind of giving you these easy pitches to knock out of the park because I'm kind of, I'm letting you kind of debate here because it's like, yeah, I think with the adoption of these new national core art standards, they're really less about students will draw with 7 values and colored pencil, illusionistic. None of that's really in there. It
Right.
is the sort of bigger picture, creative, communicating, problem solving. And then as art teachers, we have the responsibility and the duty to implement those things in the best way we know how. And that's going to look really different from teacher to teacher. And that's fine. And that's good that it looks really, really different because we're all unique and we all bring a different skill set to the table.
Exactly. And, this could be a whole nother discussion, but I think it's worthwhile to ask yourself, why are the national core art standards written that way? We're not determining projects. We are all about giving teachers autonomy, giving students autonomy, and working toward those larger goals, no matter how you get there.
Well, man, I think, you know what? We got to stop hanging out so much because we're starting to agree way too much. We need to we need to call it quits here pretty soon.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks, Tim. I really appreciate the talk. We'll talk to you later.
Yeah. Good talking to you.
It's surprising how much Tim and I have kind of rubbed off on each other. Maybe we need one of those like fancy combo names that are given to high profile Hollywood couples like Andrum or Tim Drew, or no, not at all. I think one of the big pieces of the complex puzzle that is curriculum development is that what we do is less important than how we do it. Little C curriculum is going to come and go. Projects are going to come and go as we respond to the needs and interests of our students, as we grow as artists and educators, quite frankly. No one wants to be told what to do or how to do it. We want that autonomy to keep it broad and focus on bigger, broader topics like the 21st century skills. If we can just keep the big C curriculum in mind, the attitudes, mindsets, and dispositions, if we can keep that at the forefront, we're going to be fine. Even if by following this broader, national core art standards first approach, we might be sacrificing some ideas like uniformity and lockstep compliance with the principles and elements and that all important notion of coverage. I hope you guys can kind of tell I'm being sarcastic here. I think Tim says it really well at the end. We need a broader approach to get at some of those bigger issues. Not just what projects are we going to do next, It doesn't really matter how we get there. It just matters that we do, in fact, get our students there. Art Ed Radio is developed, produced, and supported by the Art of Education with audio engineering by Michael Crocker. All right, one more time for all you lovely Art Ed Radio and AOE fans out there, we've got that special discount code for AOE's Art Ed Now conference coming up on February 18th. I mean, you still haven't signed up yet? Have you just been putting it off? No worries, because Art Ed Radio listeners can enter Listeners Save 20, that's Listeners Save 20, at checkout for 20% off of registration, which is totally awesome. As always, new episodes of Art Ed Radio are released every Tuesday, and additional content can be found under the podcast tab on theartofed.com. All right, thanks for listening.